Thanks for tuning in. I trust this finds you doing well. As we go through the book of First Samuel, we saw in chapter 16 that David had been anointed king. And then in chapter 17, he takes on Goliath. By faith, a young boy, overcomes this giant of a man with the power of God. One stone into the forehead, and he falls forward, and then David takes his head. And then as it goes on in chapter 18, David, it goes back and he's serving Saul. The Spirit of the Lord had gone from Saul, and an evil spirit had come to afflict him. And it's hard for us to understand, how could God send an evil spirit to afflict him? But David was faithful, and it says in verse 5, and David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him. And Saul is becoming jealous and recognizing that the Spirit of the Lord is on David and no longer on him, and he's jealous for his kingdom, never really remembering that it was really the Lord who gave it to him to begin with. It was God's. Then after a victory, Saul's jealousy is stirred up because all of the people began to sing, Saul has struck down his thousands and David his 10,000s. And it says that Saul was very angry. He wanted the glory. And so Saul begins to think about how he could set him up. And he, it says he eyed David from that day on. Now, I've been meditating on this thought for quite a long time. How does a good God send an evil spirit to afflict someone? And I don't know if this makes sense, but in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7, it says, Paul says, so to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh. It says, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from being conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. And so, I think there is a lesson for all of us. Not that we blame everything on Satan every time we're struggling, where there's a hardship, but we recognize that we serve a sovereign God who's in control of our lives, and he's working for our good. The things that afflict us are for our good. Paul could have very easily, he says, become conceited and proud. And we know that we're to walk humbly before the Lord. He tells us, my grace is sufficient for you. The unmerited favor and the presence of Christ is sufficient for everything we will ever face. And then we make a decision, is like, do I want the power of Christ to rest upon me? I know I do, and I hope that's what you desire, but that means we need to be willing to embrace our own weakness. And, you know, it goes on and it says, the harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved, and there was David. He was playing his lyre to try and call him, and Saul hurls a spear at him, and David evades him 2 different times, and David became afraid, and Saul became angry because he knew the spirit was on David, and he did not have it. But the scripture goes on in 18 and says, David had success in all of his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. Now he was facing being murdered by the present king, even though he was anointed king himself. He didn't take things into his own hands. He was willing to be weak and let God handle things in God's way and in God's time. It said that he stood in fearful awe of him. That was Saul. But all Israel and Judah loved David. And then David marries one of the daughters of the king. And it was a big thing for him to think. He goes like, don't you think it's a person like me marrying and becoming son-in-law to the king? But Saul is using it as a trick to try and get David slain. And so he says, all I'm asking for is 100 foreskins of the Philistines as a bridal price. And so David and his men go out and they bring him 200, twice of what he asked for. And then it continues on, this back and forth all the way through chapter number 18. Saul is trying to find a way to have David killed in some battle, in some fashion, all the way through verse number 19. But the more he does, the more success that David has, the more the people are joined to him. Jonathan, the eldest son of Saul, and David become knit together as brothers. And they have a special agreement that when David comes to power, even Jonathan's son knew the Lord had departed his dad. And what his dad was doing was in wickedness. They made an agreement that David would have kindness on the family of Jonathan. And again, in chapter 19, Saul tries to kill David and he flees and escapes at night. His wife lets him down through the window so that he wouldn't be killed. And he runs and he flees to Samuel, the prophet, for protection. And even Samuel and David flee because they know Saul's sending messengers. And when Saul sent the messengers to kill them, then each of the messengers would begin to prophesy for God. All three groups, it said the Spirit of God came upon him and they prophesied. Even Saul himself come and he prophesies too. All of it was a picture that God is sovereign in the lives of his people. David had been anointed to be king, and even though Saul had lost his right to be king, he didn't give it up. He thought it was his to hold on to. And then into chapter 20, they have Jonathan and David make covenant, and Jonathan tells him his dad's out to get him, and he sends him off. He says in chapter 20, verse 42, then Jonathan said to David, go in peace, because we both have sworn of us in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord shall be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring forever. And he rose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. And this begins a period of time where David is constantly fleeing from place to place to avoid being killed by Saul. But God is showing him that he is the one who fights for him, and he will put him on the throne at the perfect time. And it's something for us to remember. When we're weak, then we're strong, because we're calling on the unending resource, which is God himself. And where does he live? He lives in us. So we don't have to be strong in ourselves, where we can embrace weakness. We can embrace insults. We can embrace hardships. We can embrace all forms of suffering, because God's grace is sufficient. His life is our sufficiency. I have this saying, and I don't know exactly where I picked it up, but at the end of self-sufficiency, we experience the sufficiency of Christ. God allows us to go through all kinds of things to embrace our weakness so that we can find him to be our strength. And remember, God is sovereign over your life. He will make his promises to come to pass, and he will fight for you at every step. I hope you find encouragement in this, and I hope that you'll meditate on it and embrace the weakness, for it's Christ who is your strength. God bless.